Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicholas Zoshak. The month is October 2014, and my instructor is Donald Johnson. Today, I'm going to be talking about physics in game design, and as it relates to my field, which is game design, as I'm going to Full Sail right now to obtain a bachelor's in video game design. So first, we're going to talk about the physics engines of games and how they've evolved. Now, this may seem kind of basic answer to a physics-related problem or situation in video game design, but to me, it's the biggest one. It's what makes our games actually feel real and feel that we actually have control and can understand what's going on, the little nuances, or the entire game. So first off, are there even physics in video games? Well, of course, there's physics in everything, but in video games, it has to determine everything you do. It has to determine your character's jumping height and speed and running and your ballistics for weapons and vehicles, and it really has to do with everything. But I went back and I played certain games to determine 3 different types of engines that have really evolved and changed since video games have really been around. So the first ones I went back to were special purpose engines. Now these are very specific engines that have to deal with very almost minute things, but it creates the entire game and allows it to be fun. The first on the left here we have Pong. And Pong, as we all know, was one of the first video games, if not the first video game. And the engine behind it, you might think it has to do with the paddles, making sure the paddles are where they're supposed to be. No. The actual engine for Pong focused on the little white ball or blip that the players would bounce back and forth. Now, this engine would track that ball and see where it's at and what it's bounced off, the top, the bottom, or the 2 paddles on the sides. And it would send the ball back in a trajectory that was appropriate at the right angle, and if it came at the right speed when a player could hit it with the paddle, it would accelerate the ball. And it was very basic, but it had those principles of acceleration, velocity, and the trajectory that made it the game that it is. And then secondary on the right, we have Asteroids. And Asteroids was another great game with a very, very specific engine. The engine focused on your spaceship one being able to move in a vacuum because you are in space, so there's no real resistance. So the player has to actually turn themselves around with their engines, quote unquote, because you can't really rely on gravity or resistance to do that. And then the asteroids themselves, when they are on their certain trajectory and they're blown up by the player so the player can receive points, they burst into little asteroids, little rocks, and those rocks have a certain trajectory depending on the angle and the speed that other asteroid was going. Like I said, these are very basic, but these started off the games for us. So it allowed us to move to things like the Tank Wars engines. Now these are very specific types of games where a player will control a tank and they have to use the wind speed, their velocity, the angle, sometimes even movement. As we can see here on the right, the games have evolved from being the 2D, just one plane of view games like on the left, which are great, and it really started these types of games. But on games like on the left, it's now 3D, and you really have to take these physics into whether you know you are or not. You really have to take these into consideration and use them with your angle and your velocity and your wind speed and your vehicle speed and your vehicle position, and use all these physics principles that we've been learning and put them all together. And I actually, when I was playing them, I just kind of thought back to what we've been learning about, and it actually helped me. These games are all determined on that. Whether you may not realize, you may just think, oh, I'm blowing stuff up, but the developers have really put in a very good physics engine that lets us actually calculate these types of things, and it makes you think. And then last but not least, we have the first-person shooter engines. Now these games are my favorite type of games, and a lot of people's too, but what a lot of people won't realize or don't realize is that there's physics abound in first-person shooters. A lot of first-person shooters, the rounds, of course, if you shoot like a battle rap or something like that, it's pretty much instant and it goes across, so there's not really much to think about there. However, a lot of newer games will come out with, you have drag. If you shoot a round far ways away, the gravity will pull it down. So you have to come up with that, or come back to that and just like kind of figure it out. However, what I focused on were a couple older ones. Now, Halo 1 here on the right was one of the shooters that revolutionized first-person shooters. And why? Well, it came out with a two-system movement and looking combat style, where most games back then were just one joystick, and they would move and look and aim all at the same time. So what you had to do back then was pretty rudimentary, but Halo came and gave you the two joysticks where you could look and shoot at the same time. And then they also introduced these vehicles, like this one in the picture is a Warthog. It's like a dune buggy type Jeep thing, and it was a little hairy to drive at first, but once you got used to it, it was great. It felt very realistic to something like a dune buggy or something in our reality. And these physics engines behind it, with the acceleration, with on different types of slopes, because there would be resistance, of course, and just being able to drive it and being able to kind of get really good at it, you had to be aware of those types of things. And then on the left here we have Half-Life with the infamous gravity gun. Now the gravity gun was great. Not only could you pick up anything in an environment and make it a weapon, but you could actually launch it off and use physics, again, not really thinking about it, but using it to bounce it off walls, to bounce it under things, to lob it over enemies, such as grenades and explosives. And here the character is using a saw to hack through his enemies. And all of this has to do so much with these physics engines that were put together by these developers and just evolved and make the games we know them to be. If our games did not have these engines, there would be no sense of reality and nobody would really understand exactly what's going on. So we have to thank all of these developers for their great contribution to our industry, and hopefully in the future I can put my mark on it too. So thank you for watching. I know I ran a little bit over, but this is a very good topic for me. It's very personal, and I hope you learned something and enjoyed it. These are my sources for all the images that I used in my discussion. Thank you again, and have a great day.